Hello everyone, I'm day weather meteorologist Don Day with your WSR weekly weather update for this December 2nd, 2020. Well, in the business, when we have a long stretch of fair weather, we like to call it severe clear, and that's how the weather is going to go for most of the central and western United States over the next 5 to 7 days. So mostly of what we're going to talk about today is what happens in the long term, because what's coming for the next 5 to 7 days is pretty bland. Very quiet weather will take us through the middle of next week. We're still expecting a trend to colder, more active weather across the west after December 10th. We talked about this last week where we thought we had to go a week and a half or so into December before things started to get busy. That remains on schedule. Part of the reason for that, we're going to see the polar vortex, a big pocket of very cold air up at the higher latitudes that's going to expand across the pole and then move south across the northern hemisphere mid to late December, and that's going to result in colder weather for the west. That's also going to result in better chances for precipitation, especially in the mountains, but some low elevations of the west as well. So the second, third, maybe the fourth weeks of December, we finally get into a more wintry weather pattern. But before then, we've got 5 to 7 days, maybe 8 days, where there just won't be much happening from the western high plains to the west coast. So let's talk about what's coming after that. The jet stream pattern right now is favoring all the stormy weather in the east and the Great Lakes. Here's the system that has recently moved through the western high plains and Rockies, bringing some light snow and some pretty chilly December conditions, but it's a storm that brought just Canadian moisture and not a lot of water to work with. You can see this area of high pressure, a ridge building along the west coast and the Pacific Northwest. This area of high pressure is going to slowly expand and cover the central and northern Rockies for the second half of this week, this weekend, and the first half of next week. Now, this is by Saturday. We have a broad ridge of high pressure overhead. We have a weak little system here that's not going to do much. This is the same storm that's in the region right now, but that's just going to drift down into Old Mexico and really not be much of a weather maker. All the weather continues to be in the east. However, if we were to go out further, this takes us to the 10th and 11th, you can see a real change in the pattern. We go from this high pressure ridge and a low out in the Pacific to an area where there's high pressure building in the eastern Pacific. This starts to drive colder air south into the region and moisture. So by that Thursday, Friday timeframe of next week is when wintry weather, colder temperatures, and snow will return to the western United States, maybe even a little precipitation along the west coast. Notice this blue area here. This is some really, really cold air building up northwest of Hudson Bay. The polar vortex, we call it, the pocket of spinning cold air that forms in the higher latitudes every winter. Sometimes it stays up here, sometimes it expands, sometimes it contracts during the course of the winter season. And as we go looking down the road, we see that polar vortex expanding, and that's going to mean colder weather entering the United States towards the middle to the end of December. And this is what it looks like by next weekend. The weekend after this, notice the blue and the green here in the western United States. Relative to normal, these are colder than average temperatures. Notice warmer than average temperatures in a lot of Canada. When you get warmer than average temperatures up there, that pushes the colder air into the lower United States. And look at the cold up here in Alaska. Having cold temperatures in Alaska in a La Nina is really consistent. That is something that we'll see. Now look at the east. It really warms up. So this is an indication of some bigger changes coming after that 10th and 11th of the month. Here's the polar vortex, or let's say the stratospheric anomalies. Looking down, if we were to look down from the North Pole for the time period that we're in right now, you would see that the real cold air is really located up on the other side of the pole, more towards Siberia, more towards up here. But look what happens as we go in the future. That blue area expands. Look at this. This side of the northern hemisphere is where you're going to see the polar vortex expand, and you can see it expanding all the way into the eastern United States from the Rockies and points east, while the stratosphere on this side of the globe warms up and squeezes that colder air off the pole and further south. You expect this to happen several times during the course of the winter. We haven't really seen it happen yet. That's why the winter so far has been pretty mild, relatively speaking. But that's about ready to change right as we get to the middle to the end of December. So that time frame, I want to show you something that's interesting. Now, this is for the 5-day period of the 13th through the 17th of December. Anywhere you see blue, temperatures are below average, red above average. Look at most of North America in that time frame. It's all blue, cold. Over in Siberia, Russia, Asia, cold. While these areas here are warmer. And that's what you'd expect to see. Cold, warm, cold, warm. This is an indication of the cold air coming off the poles into the mid-latitudes on both sides of the globe. And if you go back and look at that polar vortex, that's exactly what it's showing. Cold air coming in on this side of the globe, cold air coming into here. So the middle to the end of December promises much more winter weather than we've had so far. Your 30-day precipitation outlook is showing increased precipitation in the mountains of Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, and the Pacific Northwest. Very consistent with a La Nina. Notice below average precipitation on the plains in California here. We do expect that. I think this is overdone. I don't think it's going to be as dry here as it's showing. And I also don't expect it to maybe be as dry here as it's showing. Although this area here in a La Nina does tend to be dry, so I think that's going to play on out. Temperature-wise, we're starting to see that polar vortex showing where the cold is going to be most often, and that's in the western United States through the next 30 days or so. I do think this area here is not going to be as warm as the modeling is showing. I think the message here with this video is that the second half of December and into early January for everybody is going to trend colder. Brutally cold? Probably not, but colder than it's been. Here's a La Nina update for you. You can see those sea surface temperatures. Lots of green now showing up. That green showing sea surface temperatures around 2 degrees Celsius or more below average. And that La Nina is persistent, gaining strength. We still have this warm pool relative to normal in the Gulf of Alaska. As we've discussed before, that's a cold signal for the central and western United States as we go into midwinter. As long as that warm pool is there, the jet stream is going to want to go over it at times. And this is also cooling off the atmosphere across the northern hemisphere and in the tropics. Taking a look at the most recent La Nina forecast, this is where we are right now as we got to the end of October and early November. Anything below that zero line is colder than average sea surface temperatures. And you can see in the subtropical Pacific, where we track La Nina and El Nino, we are approaching 1.5 to 2 degrees below average with a lot of the modeling. Now, the average of all the computer models is this green line. Anything below that zero line, so sea surface temperatures are colder than average. This goes out to June, July, August, all the way into September. It shows that through the next several months, all the way up to spring, March, April, May, June here, those sea surface temperatures are below average, which means La Nina is going to persist. There is a strong likelihood of it into at least the beginning of the spring of 2021. Now, that's not good news for the western United States because La Ninas, on the whole, are drier than average, especially on the plains. You can have above average snow in the mountains in a La Nina, but the low elevations, especially east of the Continental Divide, and for the southern plains and the southern Rockies, it is a dry signal. And that La Nina and that dry signal looks to be going through the winter months and into at least the beginning of spring. Our next update will be the 9th. Have a good week ahead, everybody.